All right, so I have the pleasure slash burden of teaching the first day of React. Now we've been doing Django and Python for the past seems like forever, and we're going to make a quick shift back over into JavaScript world and using a React framework. Django is what's called a full stack framework, meaning that it takes care of everything on the back end. Think databases, routes, models, everything to talk with the database, to read and write from the database. And it also includes a front end, which is the thing that you see. React is exclusively a front end framework, meaning that it just dictates what you see on the screen and nothing else. It doesn't talk to the database. So whenever you have React on the front end, you're going to need something to take care of the back end. Django, luckily, can just take care of the back end as well. So we're going to run Django as what's called an API layer. It's just going to read and write from the database without any HTML views. Anytime that we need to produce anything with HTML, we're going to have React taking care of that. But let's have a real quick refresher on JavaScript, I suppose. So I did this last night. I'm going to create a file using touch. I'll call it delete.js just so I remember to delete it. And then I'm going to open up delete.js right over here. We haven't touched JavaScript in a long time. I know it's a lot of people's first language, so hopefully it'll make sense to you. But I just want to demonstrate side by side just how easy it is to have, to translate between two different languages. I'm also going to create a file called delete.py, and I'm also going to open that up here. Let's just open this whole folder up. Now on the left, I've got delete.js and delete.py. Since we're more familiar with Python right now, let's take I'm going to do something. Let's say create a class called person that takes in a name and hometown. Create a function within person called say hello that says, hi, my name is name from hometown. Does that make sense to people? So I'm just going to create a quick class person. Is that right? And then what? How do I initialize a class? Def init. And then it takes in a couple arguments. Self, name, hometown. Is that right? And then how do I declare? Cool. All right. What's next? How do I have this dot? Is it this dot name or self dot name? Self dot name equals name. Self dot hometown equals hometown. Let's just say person one equals person with Jonathan from New Jersey. And then next it says create a function within person called say hello. So I'll call say underscore hello. I need self here. And that says, hi, my name is name from hometown. So it's just a print. Hi, my name is self.name from self.hometown. Let's just verify that this works. What I've done is I've created a class called person. There's an init function to basically initialize a new instance of a person. So imagine class person being a factory. I'm creating an individual person using this init function. It takes in a name and a hometown. Name and hometown are what are called local variables, meaning they only survive between the lines of 5, 6, and 7. So if I wanted to use the name and the hometown in other methods within this class, I have to have what's called an instance variable. So I've got self.name equals name. So whenever I reference self.name, it's equal to whatever I pass in as name. Whenever I reference self.hometown, it's whatever I pass in as hometown. I've also got a method that says say hello. That's going to print, hi, my name is self.name, which we declared on line 6, from self.hometown, which we declared on line 7. So if I do person1.say hello, hopefully this will print out, hi, my name is Jonathan from New Jersey. I'm going to run it using Python delete.py, and it says, hi, my name is Jonathan from New Jersey. This was pretty quick. You know, thinking back to week 3, which was only 5 weeks ago, we didn't know anything about object-oriented programming. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the screen, and I'm just going to directly translate all of this code back into JavaScript. it looks very, very similar. I've still got the class called person. Instead of the colon, I need the opening and closing curly brace. And instead of init, I have to create something called constructor. Constructor takes in a name and a hometown. And instead of self.name, it's going to be this.name equals name, and this.hometown equals hometown. You can see just how similar this is. I need a def and a colon inside of Python to declare a function. I just need the name of the function with brackets to declare a function inside of JavaScript. All right. And then at the very bottom, I've got say hello. And again, we're doing camel case instead of snake case because these are two different languages. It's going to say, let's say console.log. Hi, my name is this.name from this.hometown. I forgot I need a $sign right here. And at the very bottom, all I've got to do is create a new person. I'm going to say const person1 is equal to new person, John, then from New Jersey. I just do person1, let's say hello. Line for line, these are the same things. Yes? It does. Because I've declared the method called say hello. I've said it's going, this is the method, and then when I execute it, it's going to execute the things within the curly brackets of console log, hello, my name is whatever.
I got a question.
Let me just verify that this works, and then I'll get to your question. Just to make sure that I'm not wrong. So I ran Python delete.py. Do people remember what I do for JavaScript? Node delete.js. Hi, my name is Jonathan from New Jersey. So just take a quick look, compare these two while I get to Justin's question.
My question was basically on line 7. Can you call it function say hello?
You could.
Okay.
But you don't need to.
And if you use the fat arrow method,
I'll tell you, we'll talk about fat arrow functions a little bit later when we get to React.
does that interfere with this?
It does. Usually for the better. So you can kind of see everything that we did inside of Python can pretty much directly be translated over to JavaScript. A few syntactical differences. I have like class person with a colon. I have a class person with opening brackets and closing brackets. This one relies heavily on spacing. JavaScript relies heavily on opening and closing brackets. We have, instead of def init, we just have constructor. We don't need to pass in self, we just pass in name and hometown. Instead of doing self.name, we do this.name. It's very, very small syntactical differences. So as long as you're comfortable in one language with object orientation, it's just a quick translation over here to another language. So now that we've got that out of the way, we're going to create our first React app. We just open everything up. Let me list out everything. Let me remove delete.js and py with one command, just like that. List everything out again, and those two go away. I could do that because delete.js and delete.py both have delete in the front, and I basically say remove everything with delete in the front dot anything. So I remove two files with one command.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Can I double wildcard that, like delete star dot star?
I would
delete everything in the folder.
I would be a little careful of that. It's possible, but I don't think I'd ever do that personally.
Yeah, it doesn't sound smart,
Yeah.
but it's just a wildcard, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to clear the screen, and let's talk about how do I start an app using Django? What is the command that people remember? Yeah, it's like I think it's like Django admin start project or start app.
Start project.
Sure, we don't need to know it exactly, but it's like there is something built in underneath the hood that will start a Django app for us. There's something in React that will also create a new React app for us, and that's called create React app. So what I'm going to do, I already ran this yesterday, so what you're going to do is you're going to do, actually what's, in Python, what's the thing to install libraries? Pip install, right? So I do pip install Django to install Django on my machine as a whole. And then Django has all those things like Django start project or Django admin start project. What is the equivalent of pip inside of JavaScript? Node Package Manager. So I could do npm install create React app. This will take a long time, but essentially what you're going to do is actually it's going to be npx. npx is an upgraded version of npm. So npx install create React app. This is the same thing as running pip install Django. So what it's saying is, hey, reach out to npm, which is Node Package Manager. It's like the one central place for all the libraries, all the registered libraries of Node. Install something called create React app. So hey, npx, find something called create React app. It's one of your libraries that's living on your website somewhere, and install that on my machine globally. Now I've done this already, and it'll probably take you about 2 to 3 minutes, which is why I'm not going to install it right over here. So let's create an actual app. So I'm going to do npx create React app. So I'm not installing because I've already got it installed, and let's just call it my app. Or yeah, let's call it my app. Now what you'll notice is that there's a lot of stuff being installed, and this could take a long time. I should have read this a little bit earlier. Are there any questions on anything while we wait for the next 30 minutes? So there's a lot of stuff underneath the hood that's being installed. So when I do npm or npx create React app, it's installing a lot of libraries that I'm going to show you in just a little bit. We've been waiting for quite a while, but it's almost finished, I think.
We have to redo this.
Yes.
Once we activate the
Yep, there's no virtual environment, I will warn you. So yeah, you're gonna have to run this every single time. When I list out everything on my desktop, I got Code Platoon, Personal, and My App that I just created. I'm gonna cd into My App and open everything inside this current window. Now we've got a whole bunch of stuff here on the left. Same thing, like when we installed Django, we had all those pre-created files. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through each folder a little bit quickly and kind of give you an idea of what's going on. So when I ran npx and create React app, my app, what they did was they installed all these things called node modules. Node modules, this folder holds all of the dependencies, all the JavaScript files locally so that we're not relying on the web being up and running at all times. So what's powering React is all of this crap. There's a lot of stuff inside of here. There's a lot of folders. Each one of these folders has a lot of like actual JavaScript inside of it. I don't know what file size is, but underneath the hood of all of my React stuff, all of this code is actually executing underneath the hood. I don't know what this is. I'm not going to pretend to know. But essentially, every single JavaScript library that React requires is going to be listed inside of here. That's node modules. Public has a bunch of what's called public-facing assets, which is you'll see this in a quick second. The top left corner of every single Google Chrome, like if I bring this over, like this is what's called a fav icon. This is what's called a public-facing asset. It's something that's going to face the public. So I've got this fav icon that's going to have this little atom. Node modules, you don't need to worry about because that comes for free. Public, you generally don't need to mess with a terribly large amount. All of your stuff is going to be inside of src. Now, index.js is what's the main entry point of everything. And do you remember from Django, we were just from whatever file import this particular library? It's the same thing, but instead of from coming first, it's just import coming first. Import the React library from the React node module. Import the React DOM library from the React DOM node module right up here. And what you'll see is it's bringing in these two libraries. It's bringing in the CSS file, which is this file right over here. And then it's saying import app from /app. So from the current folder, bring in the app.js. And this is our current layout for app.js. Let's read line by line. So I've got import the React library from React, import the logo from this particular file, and then import the CSS file. And I've got a giant function called app. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to load the server up right here. So the way that I run this is npm, is it run server or is start server?
Start.
Oh, it's just start. npm start. All right, as that's loading, all I did was I typed in npm start, and that would start the server. If we were going to do the same thing inside of Django, it would be python manage.py run server, and that starts the server up for you. All you got to do is just go npm start, and that will start everything for you. What you'll notice is, remember that little 5 icon? That little thing showed up on the top left side over here, on the very top. And this is everything that's showing up inside of app.js. It just says edit source app.js to save into reload. If I just removed all of this stuff inside of here, and I changed, maybe change this word, hello world, and I saved it, go back over here, it just says hello world. So I'm updating some stuff within React, and then it's updating right over here. All right, I'm gonna bring this down a little. Actually, I'm just gonna close that here. So React is a little bit funny. So React is an open source JavaScript front-end framework created by Facebook. There was a period of time back in like 2014, 2015 when everyone was trying to create like the next JavaScript framework that was going to be used within the industry. There was literally a website called Days Since the Last JavaScript Framework. And at most it was like 40 or 50 days over that course of that particular year, because everyone wanted to be the people who created that particular framework that everyone was going to use. And then Facebook came out with React and then basically crushed everyone. Whenever a large company or a particular industry backs a library, language, or a framework, you can rely on that one being around for a long period of time. React is not going anywhere. It is probably going to be the dominant JavaScript library for the next 10 years or so. The same thing is happening with Python right now. A lot of companies are adopting Python as their language. The data science community is using exclusively Python, which is why we see a meteoric rise of Python being used. The financial services industry and all like old school services all use Java, which is why Java has been around for a long time. Google's backing Python, which is also why Python's being used quite a bit. So when you see large companies backing something, you can generally rely on that framework being around for a while. But with React being the way that it is, and because it's being updated all the time, this was the most recent addition. We're going to use what's called class-based components and functional-based components. The new way of using React is using what's called function-based components, which is what you see over here. The old school way of doing things is using class-based components. Anytime that you're going to create something new in React these days, you're going to be using function-based components. But anytime that you read or write old React code, it's going to be using class-based components. You do need to know both, and I will show you both of those things. So I'm going to replace this entire thing with just, let's just have a P for hello world. So what's happening here is, I'm going to get rid of this logo. I've got a function called app within app.js. App.js is loaded here on line number 4. Once it's brought in on line number 4, the React DOM library renders it onto the screen. You don't need to worry about this. Just know that app.js is your entry point into all your React things. Now, function app is just a giant, you can think of it just as a giant collection of methods underneath the top layer called app. There's one method called return. Return is what actually gets rendered out to the screen. So I've got a div here, I've got a closing div, and I've got a opening p type that says hello world. So this is what's being returned out to the screen, just this hello world. And you can see that I've got this tiny little thing that says hello world. I'm going to change that to an H1 just so it's a little bit more visible for remote students. I've got hello world right over here. This is what's called an example of JSX. So do you remember in Django, we were doing stuff with Jinja 2 templates? It was HTML with Python inside of it. React has something very similar, which is called JSX, which is also called embedded JavaScript. It's HTML with JavaScript inside of it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just copy and paste a bunch of stuff for now right now. So I'm going to create a quick app that just has a counter and then goes up and down based on how many times that you click it. And while you may think this is a really, really stupid game that we're about to create, it's just I've been clicked X times, I'm going to click this and some stuff is going to happen on the screen pretty soon. It's a stupid game, but there's something called cookie clicker, which I kid you not, is literally just the same thing. This particular thing did actually sell to like somebody else. They're selling ad space. Like they make a lot of money on this very, very stupid game. But all you do is you just keep clicking this cookie. And at one point, once you start clicking enough, you'll get like additional add-ons and stuff like that. So it's a really stupid thing, but it just demonstrates what you can make online. So again, let's just read top to bottom. Line number 1, I'm importing React from the React library, making this whole thing a React library, part of the React app. Number 2, I'm importing the app.css styling sheet inside of here. App.css is right over here. Pretty simple stuff coming in. I've got a function called app, which is just a collection of methods. There's no methods in here right now except for return. Return is basically what shows up on the screen. So inside of here, I've got my div, and it's just an H1 that says I have been clicked X times, and then a button that says click me. Right now, I have been clicked X times. A button that just says click me doesn't do anything yet. All right, let's replace X with an actual number. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a library called useState from React. Inside of here, outside of return, I'm going to create a constant called count, and then a method called setCount equals useState of 0. All right, so let's review what I just did. I added 3 things: 1, 2, and 3. I brought in the entire React library from the node module called React. I then also brought something called useState, which is a smaller library within React. So I brought that inside, and I'm using it down here on line number 5. Now, state is this weird like React concept. It's going to be hard to understand it for a little bit of time, but the way that I like to view it as is state is a giant hash of stuff that lives on this particular component. So imagine it's like a giant dictionary where count is currently equal to 0. And if I ever wanted to overwrite count, I also get a method to overwrite count right over here with setCount. So what I've done here is it's instead of saying I have been clicked X times, I'm going to say I have been clicked. This is the way that I interpolate using JSX. I believe that in Jinja it's 2, right? So inside of JSX it's just 1. Right. So if all goes well, I should go back and say I have been clicked 0 times. So again, I just brought in a library called useState. useState creates what's called a state, a class level. Essentially, this is what's happening. That's what it's creating underneath the hood. It's just a dictionary of like key and value pairs, and currently count is equal to 0. Another way to write it using the function-based classes, function-based components is saying const count is equal to whatever you pass in over here. I can pass this in as 5. Comment this out for now. And it says I have been clicked 5 times. So this is the starting count is equal to whatever you pass in over here. I'm going to say 0 to start. And whenever I want to overwrite count, they give me a method called setCount, which is really nice. So right now, if I go back to my app, it says I have been clicked 0 times. And when I click it, nothing happens. I need to create what's called an event handler. So whenever on click, I'm going to do handle click. Handle click, you can name whatever you want. I'm just going to call it handle click for right now. And remember, app is just a series of is just a collection of methods and constants. So one of those methods is return. One of those constants is count and set count. I'm going to create another constant called handle click. Make that a fat arrow function. I'm going to do set count, count plus 1. So let's take a look again. We brought in the React library. We brought in the useState library within React. We're setting the count equal to 0. And then useState also returns like the ability to overwrite count using a method called setCount. I've got this, I have been clicked count times. When I first started, it's going to be 0. And then whenever I click on this button, the method called handle click is going to fire off. Handle click is here on line 7. It's a fat arrow function, which we always want to use because it binds handle click to this particular app. And what I'm going to, whenever I click on it, it's going to set count of count plus 1. It's going to overwrite count to be whatever it currently is plus 1. So if I jump back over here, I've been clicked 0 times. When I click this, it goes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, all the way up to as many times as you want to click it. Again, I have been clicked X times. I have been clicked count times. This is a number that keeps increasing, and then it will automatically increase within your application. Whenever I click on the button called click me, handle click fires off, which overwrites the count to that plus 1. Any questions on that?
Just the syntactically
Yep.
constant bracket count on the set count to some method taking in
Yep.
state. That's the first time.
That is the first time I've seen it as well. Last time I taught this was it was the 3rd day that this had come out. But this is the new way of setting something like count like this.
So that's called array destructuring. So the useState method returns 2 items, count and set count. So it returns the actual state that you want, so count, and it also returns another item or another method called set count. Will always return like that. So useState will return 2 items.
So you're just predefining the default values.
So for the count is the predefined for the state value you want, and then set count. You can call that set group or set whatever. It just overrides whatever.
No. So essentially what's happening is useState will return 2 things. useState will, the first thing that it will return is just some sort of number. Like whenever I pass in the 0 here, the 0 is getting returned as the count. Again, you can call this whatever you want. I call it count because that makes sense in this particular application. You can call it poop. You can call it whatever you want. It also, useState also returns something called set count, which is the ability to overwrite this original value. So it returns 2 things. And what Tom was saying is we have this array destructuring going on here. It's a fancy way of saying I'm returning 2 things inside of an array. The first thing is called count. The second thing is called set count. Count is what you pass in right over here. Set count is the method to overwrite that.
Now, John, are these setters and getters that we're making?
This is, you can consider this a setter. Kind of, yeah.
Okay, I didn't see where it actually, it just kind of auto-magically, you know. gave
Yes,
you the ability to set
useState
that.
automatically assigns all of this for you. Now, what I'm going to show you next is what's called a class-based component. So these are functional components. This is, I feel like you can memorize this and just kind of create a bunch of stuff using this. But to make things really, really confusing on the first day, because you need to know it, is let's say, for instance, that I've got app.js. This is the main entry point of my app. But what if I wanted to make this button, what if I wanted to make multiple buttons? Like I want something that's reusable again. We want to make everything a single responsibility as possible. Right now, app.js is in charge of creating the button, having the button keep track of its own count. But what if I wanted multiple buttons on the screen?
Set in a class, import
Yep.
in a class.
Yep, create a class and import that class into this particular one. So I'm going to essentially take all the contents out of app.js, create a components folder. Within there, I'm going to create what's called a button component folder, component. And within that folder, I'm going to create something called button component.js. What I'm doing is app.js should just be in charge of rendering out the page. It shouldn't be in charge of things like the button, how many count a particular thing has. If you look at something like, I'm not an Instagram user, but Instagram.com. If I go to Instagram, I don't know, is that DHH? I don't know who this person is. That's not the DHH one. DHH, Instagram, Rails. I think he got rid of it. Who's a famous person on Instagram? Taylor Swift, Instagram. All right. If you think of this giant page as one huge React app, there are many components. Like the whole thing that you're seeing right over here is app.js. Now, should app.js be in charge of each individual picture's number of likes and comments? What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? What about all of these over here? What about this profile picture up here? If app.js knows everything about this entire page, it's not single responsibility anymore. So what's happening is on this entire page at app.js, there might be a profile picture component. There might be many different photo components, like, photo, like square components that each keep track of this particular picture of Taylor Swift has 1.2 million likes. This particular one has 1.1 million likes. Each individual component is in charge of its own domain. And that's the same thing that's happening here with our particular button components. App.js shouldn't know everything about how many times something has been clicked. Only the button should be in charge of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this entire thing and dump it inside of here. A little bit. And I'm going to change a few things to make this a class-based component instead of a functional component. So the first thing I'm going to get rid of is use state. I'm going to change that to component. Get rid of that. Maybe I'll just bring in, actually, I don't want that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment everything out just so you can see it side by side. And I'm going to do class button component instead of function app, import extends. So I've got a button component which inherits from the component library up here. I'm going to say state is equal to a giant object to start off with. I'm going to create that same thing. I'm going to call it handle click. Now I'm going to have a render. Let me make this a little smaller. Let me split the screen so you can see these side by side. Make this a tiny bit smaller. I hope that's still legible. I'm going to change this to state.count and this.handle. All right, so on the left, we have what's called a function-based component. They both do exactly the same thing. This is what it looks like in terms of a function. This is what it looks like in terms of a button. You may like classes better. You may like functions better. It's really up to you which one you like better. So at the very top of this class button component, I've got a state object, which is equal to count as 0. This is the other way to write it inside a function is to do this line over here. Use state, pass in 0, that's going to equal count. Or you can just say state equals an object, count is equal to 0. Handle click, I don't need a const inside the class because it's within the class. But within the app, I do need to declare it as const over here. I guess, yeah, I would recommend that at least. Now, whenever I click on this, I set the count to be whatever it currently is plus 1. Set count comes to me for free from use state. When I'm looking at the class-based component, whenever I click on it, it's going to say this, which refers to the button component, dot set state, and then I'm going to overwrite the state is the count is going to be the current one plus 1. So set state is the same thing as set count. You always need set state to alter things within the state. And then you'll see that return and return are more or less the same, but return is within a function called render. Render, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want right over there. But once you get to the return, that's the thing that gets pushed out to the screen. And this was just saying, I have been clicked, this, referring to the button, dot state, dot count times. And then whenever I click on it, it's going to be this dot handle click rather than just handle click. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to import this from here. I took out all the functionality within app and I replaced it with button component. So on line 1, I'm bringing in React from the React DOM library. I'm bringing in button component from this particular file. There's that export default button component. Basically, this says whenever people call into this file, export the entire class to be used in external classes. And then now easily, when I look inside a function app, I've got a return that's got a div, and it just says button component. At this point, I'm basically passing it off to this to have inside of here. So let's see if this works. All right, so I've been clicked 0 times. I can still increment everything like this. So app.js loads. It loads up the button component. Button component includes all this code, which is a class-based version of what we wrote a little bit earlier. And the cool part about this, just like Taylor Swift's Instagram, is that I can have many different individual components that all keep track of their own state. Let's say I wanted to create 10 different buttons. I've been clicked 10 times. Now, each one of these components keep track of how many times I've clicked them and doesn't alter the other ones. So this first component that's rendered has been clicked 3 times. The second component that's been rendered has been clicked 4 times. And each individual component keeps track of its own individual state. If you think about Taylor Swift Instagram, each one of these pictures is a photo component. Each one of them has a different number of likes, and I guess she doesn't allow comments on her photos, but each one of these keeps track of a different number of likes. They're all a little bit different. Same thing here. Each one of these button components keeps track of how many times it's been shown up. And one final refactor before I pass it off to Tom. This is not very programmatic. Copying and pasting things a billion times is not great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function to change it called create buttons. I'm just going to say let buttons equals an empty array, or let I equals 0, I is less than 100. So we'll create 100 buttons, I++. And we'll just do buttons.push button component. And at the very end, we're going to return buttons. This is a simple for loop. So whenever I call this, it's going to create an empty array called buttons. I'm going to push in 100 button components and return that out here. And then down at the bottom, all I got to do is just call create buttons. So again, app.js is what's actually being loaded. I'm firing off the method create buttons, which creates 100 button components and returns it out to me. So if I go back and I refresh, you can see that I have 100 buttons, each with their own individual state. All right, let's take a look at what we've got for today. So all of the things that I did today is listed right over here. If you want to learn a little bit about history of the web, there is a video that I'll find and I'll post that has me talking about the history of the web and why React has come to be the way that it is. Everything that I said today is written here. So if you're a person who likes to read things and understand things through reading rather than through verbal stuff, everything I've listed is here. It is Wednesday, so you don't need to pair today, but I would recommend it. That being said, I would go through all of this first and just make sure that you understand what's going on. Everything here, everything that I said is written. And there are 3 challenges for today. There's one called detention, palindrome, and state abbreviator. Detention, you're basically going to write something 1,000 times, but instead of you writing it 1,000 times, you're going to programmatically create it so that it is written 1,000 times. Palindrome is pretty cool. It's essentially going to be a app which has a box on the screen, and whenever I type stuff inside that box, it will tell me immediately whether or not it's a palindrome or not a palindrome. And finally, state abbreviator. It's going to create a drop down of all the states, and when I click on a particular state, it'll write out the full state name rather than be like, instead of IL, it'll actually write out Illinois. That being said, we'll take a break until 10:15, and then we'll come back and we'll do these challenges. Sound good? Cool. I'll see you all next week.